Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show. Coming up, Keir Starmer sets out his mission to make Britain a clean energy superpower and lead the world on zero-carbon electricity. The government's plans to scrap EU laws by the end of the year are undemocratic and risk efforts to address the climate crisis, according to environmental groups, citing new legal research. A landslide in Brazil kills more than 40 people, with the country's environment minister warning climate disasters are not going away. Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show, where we track the changes to our world and investigate some of the potential solutions to the climate crisis. Now, Sir Keir Starmer says making Britain a clean energy superpower, one of his 5 national missions. Now, that's if Labour wins the next election. In a major speech in Manchester, he said under a Labour government, Britain would lead the world in making all electricity production zero carbon by 2030. Well, let's get more on this now from our politics and business correspondent, Amanda Acas. Thanks so much for joining us, Amanda. What do you think this says about Labour and Sir Keir Starmer's commitments to climate change moving forward?
Well, I think Labour are very keen to demonstrate that this really is a big priority for them if they're to win the next general election. This pledge to end the involvement of any fossil fuels in electricity generation in Britain by 2030 is a clear, distinct pledge, and it is very different. It stands out from anything that we have heard from the government so far on this, and in particular I think it's more distinct than any of the other pledges that we heard from Sir Keir Starmer today, particularly in comparison with the 5 promises set out by Rishi Sunak at the start of the year. Now, the promise to turn the UK into a clean energy superpower isn't new. This was a key promise made by Sir Keir Starmer at the Labour Party conference in the autumn, as well as the founding of the Great British Energy, a new publicly owned company designed to invest in and really concentrate on renewable energy sources. Clearly, I think what we heard from Sir Keir Starmer was a real determination to marry together 2 big priorities: progress towards the country's net zero commitments, as well as really capitalising on the economic opportunities of the green industrial revolution. Let's have a listen.
Zero carbon British electricity by 2030. A huge goal which will allow us to accelerate to net zero. Make no mistake, this goal would turn Britain into a clean energy superpower. It will put us ahead of any major economy in the world. That's a sharp intake of breath, by the way.
Now, Sir Keir did set out some more detail about how Labour would hope to get there: insulating 90 million homes, training more people to be heat pump engineers and so on. And interestingly, he also made reference, particularly in the questions, to the fact that there's big investment in green technology and a big focus on this from the US government. Also in the EU, of course, concerns that the UK economy risks being overtaken by other parts of the world on this. Now, how does this compare to the current government policies? It's not really quite as ambitious. We know, of course, the government are planning to get to net zero by 2050. And although there are various grants to try and decarbonise generation of power, nothing as specific as this 2030 goal. We do know, of course, earlier this month, the government set up the new Department of Energy Security and Net Zero to be headed by Grant Shapps, a bit of a return to the old Labour equivalent Department of Energy and Climate Change set out by Gordon Brown back in 2008, and this is one of their priorities to work towards net zero, although clearly I think the government's focus really at the moment, from everything we've heard, is more about energy security and bringing the cost of people's bills down. And I think fundamentally, unless that department gets substantial new powers and new money, it's not really clear how much difference that will really make, but perhaps we might find out more in the budget next month.
OK, Amanda, thank you very much. Amanda Acas in Westminster there. Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other stories now. And Labour says fishermen in the North East have had the door slammed on them after the government said it wouldn't be investigating further into the mass crustacean die-off along the Teesside coast. Now, local fishermen and environmental campaigners have long believed that the dumping of material at sea from dredging sites could be responsible, though the government disputes that.
concerned about the impact of livelihoods and jobs, generational pride impacted by the government's indifference. They said the entire fishing fleet in Hartlepool is finished. There's no business left. They failed us when we begged them to listen.
We had a further review with leading scientific advisors. That came out with what was published to the committee and to the House. And we understand that this has been a novel pathogen is the most likely explanation for what happened in the North East.
British power generator Drax Group says its profits rose by 83% to £731 million last year. Now, Drax generates electricity in North Yorkshire by burning wood pellets and says its power plant is crucial to energy security. But critics are slamming the hundreds of millions in green subsidies the company receives, accusing it of greenwashing. Now, US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says her candidate for the new president of the World Bank will be committed to fighting climate change. Now, the World Bank expects to appoint a new president by early May, and the US candidate has always been selected. Now, Yellen was speaking at the G20 meeting in India, where climate finance is expected to be a key talking point. And 40 people have been killed by a landslide in Brazil caused by heavy rains and flooding. Rescue teams are still searching for people and assessing the damage in the Sao Paulo region. Now, while visiting the area, Brazil's Environment and Climate Change Minister warned extreme weather events driven by climate change won't go away.
More than 1,800 cities are as vulnerable as this one. This changing in the temperature, the change in the climate, this is not going to change, unfortunately. We, the government, are the ones who will have to work to adapt the cities, looking to the poorest ones who live near mountains.
Now, environmental groups say the government's plans to scrap EU laws by the end of the year undermined democracy and could significantly harm efforts to address the climate crisis. Citing new legal analysis, they say the plans will give too much power to ministers and even threaten environmental protections. Now, the government says the bill is needed to amend or remove burdensome EU law. Well, joining me now is lawyer Angus Eames from environmental law charity Client Earth, one of the groups actually involved in the research. Mr Eames, thank you so much for joining us on the Daily Climate Show. If you would, could you outline for our viewers, if these EU legislations are scrapped, what this will mean for people in the UK?
Thank you for having me on. So this bill would effectively scrap all laws on our books from the time when the UK was in the EU. Now, those laws touch on a wide range of subject areas that affect people's lives on an everyday basis. There are rules that dictate the quality of drinking water, air quality, food standards, protections for species and habitats, but also consumer protections and employment laws. So the bill would effectively scrap all of these at the end of this year.
And is there any way to delay that scrapping? What would you like to see moving forward?
Well, we think that the bill, for reasons that perhaps we'll come on to, should be dropped in its entirety. It represents a transfer of power, of legislative power from Parliament to the government. It would leave decisions about the topics I've just talked about in the hands of ministers with effectively no oversight from Parliament. We recognise that laws from the UK's time in the EU might be up for review, they might need changing, they might be amending to best fit Britain now that we left the European Union. We don't object to that process. We believe there are lots of laws that could be improved. We would say that the process by which the bill envisions for that is irresponsible and it creates too much time pressure and a bit of a ticking time bomb.
OK, Angus Eames, thank you so much for your time on the Daily Climate Show today. OK, now just a reminder that you can watch Tom Heap tackle issues around river pollution and sewage. That's on Saturday and Sunday at 3:30 here on Sky News. And if you scan the QR code on the screen right now, you can listen to this week's edition of Climate Cast and just subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts from. And before we go, we want your climate questions. Anything that's ever mystified you about the environment or whatever you want to get to the bottom of, scan this QR code on your screen right now and send us your questions, and we'll try to get to the bottom of them on The Climate Show with Tom Heap. Well, for now, that's all from us. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Join us again on the Daily Climate Show next week at 3:30.